They said that no car could fly without propellers. They said that the air itself would tear apart any engine that tried to do that. But on the eve of the impending war, in an abandoned German workshop, a young physicist decided to challenge the sky. He wasn't creating a weapon. He was creating the heart of the future. A machine that will exhale fire instead of rotating blades. He was talking about fire, which can move metal, and air, which can move by itself. My colleagues were laughing. The officials ignored him. Even physics seemed to be protesting. Hans von Ohain, the man who changed the world of physics. When the world still believed in the propeller, it heard the sound of flame. Back then, air was still slow, and the sky was something like a stage, where old airplanes circled like mechanical seagulls. Engineers argued about blade strength, wing shape, and how many revolutions per minute a motor could withstand. No one thought you could squeeze more out of the air than it gave. No one except one. Hans von Ohain didn't dream of fame or speed. He simply disliked noise. The rattle of propellers irritated him, as if the sky creaked under the weight of machines. He longed for silence, that pure, resonant kind, where a plane doesn't push through the air, but glides within it like lightning. He believed an engine shouldn't spin. It should burn. It shouldn't shove wings. It should launch them into the future. He was too young to know the word impossible, and too stubborn to listen to it. At university, he brought professors' calculations that looked like a joke. If you compress and ignite air, it becomes power itself. The professors laughed. The fuel will explode. The turbine will melt. The idea will sink. But von Ohain looked through them, toward a sky clearer than formulas. At night, he sat in the lab, twisting metal pipes, screwing on valves, stealing every extra atmosphere of pressure from physics. He wasn't an engineer. He was an alchemist, searching for a way to turn air into fire. He lacked everything: money, parts, trust. But he had what others didn't: an unrelenting sense that the time he lived in couldn't keep up with his thoughts. The newspapers wrote about speed records, new fighter planes, and upcoming triumphs in the sky. Germany was preparing for a storm, but Hans was busy with another kind of storm, the one meant to be born inside an engine. He saw the future not in guns or wars, but in the roar that would one day slice through the air and change the very idea of flight. While others counted kilometers, he counted impulses. While they measured wind speed, he tried to tame its flame. And in that was his madness and his fate, the late 1930s. Europe trembles like a taut wire, ready to snap from a single spark. Hitler still smiles from the podiums, but everyone already senses it's a smile that smells of smoke. Nations are building airplanes like archers drawing their bows. England, France, the Soviet Union, Germany, each gnawing at the sky, trying to steal an extra second, an extra kilometer of speed. The air becomes an arena. Up there, it's not just about whose technology is faster, it's about who will rule the future. And every propeller spinning in the blue expanse sounds like a drum of war. And engineers are the same everywhere. They don't march, they don't wear caps. They live among the sounds of bolts and the smell of oil. And all they talk about is speed. But speed, as it turns out, has a limit. The propeller has reached the ceiling of physics. The faster it spins, the more it compresses the air. And at some point, the blades begin to work against the plane. Air no longer obeys mechanics. It rebels. And then every engineer faces the same nightmare. You can boost the engine, you can lighten the aircraft, but you can't make the blades spin faster than the air itself allows. At this time, Germany becomes a forge of both wonders and nightmares. In the Reich's laboratories, lights burn until dawn. Mathematicians, physicists, designers work in 3 shifts because the government demands the impossible. The Ministry of Aviation, under Göring's command, whispers to the designers, "Give us what no one else has, a plane no one can catch." And yet, beneath all the slogans and blueprints, among the mountains of metal and paper, a shared weariness hides. Science is stalling. Too many propellers, too few ideas. German engineers are already playing at the edge of the possible. The Messerschmitt, Bf 109. The pride of the nation roars in the sky, but even it runs into limits. How much more can be squeezed from pistons invented half a century ago? How many times can a wing's shape be redesigned before aerodynamics itself tires of experimentation? Every designer dreams of a miracle, but miracles aren't issued by decree. And so laboratories begin to resemble temples of despair. Scientists walk there like priests among their idols' engines that promise everything but offer nothing new. And yet, above this picture of stable madness, one thought hovers. Maybe the answer isn't to improve the propeller, but to abandon it altogether. But that idea sounds like heresy. No propeller means no motion. Too simple, too risky, too soon. By now, the world isn't just preparing for war, it's becoming a machine. Every invention, every engine, every bolt is now part of the coming cataclysm. And in Germany, where efficiency has become a new religion, every engineer is bound to serve a purpose. Any "what if we tried something else" is met with cold silence. Those who think differently risk not just their careers, but their fate. But it is in times like these that those are born who hear the noise of what's coming before anyone else. Those who don't look at front lines, but at lines on blueprints. They feel the old world of technology cracking, like an old frame under the pressure of the wind. And if a new way to fly isn't found, the air itself will cast man out of the sky. And somewhere amid this metallic roar and military discipline sits a young man with a notebook full of numbers and eyes reflecting a sky filled with smoke. He hears the roar of engines, but hears something else in it. Fatigue, repetition, a limit. Hans von Ohain doesn't think about flags or borders. He thinks about the laws of physics, which are about to collapse under the weight of humanity's ambition. He sees every nation preparing weapons, and he knows the most terrifying weapon is no longer the gun, but the equation. While everyone else sees a battle in the sky, he sees a dead end. And while engineers across Europe search for a way to make the propeller spin faster, he is already searching for a way to eliminate it entirely. He wasn't a designer. He didn't wear epaulets, didn't draft military schematics, didn't stand at an assembly line. He was a quiet man with eyes that seemed to see through metal. Hans von Ohain, a young physicist from Germany, a man who listened not to the sound of engines, but to the breath of air. He was born not for war, but for formulas. To him, engines weren't machines, they were equations that could be perfected. While other students dreamed of working in factories or aviation companies, he preferred the solitude of laboratories. Somewhere in a corner, among flasks, valves, and copper pipes, he could spend hours watching how air changed its behavior under pressure. It wasn't engineering curiosity, it was love for mystery. He saw air not as emptiness, but as a living substance waiting to be awakened. Not just heated, not just compressed, but made to work. If air can push wings, he thought, then it can push itself. And that thought took root in him like a seed growing into the very core of the future. Hans was a man of a strange breed. He didn't believe in the impossible. He thought boundaries were just lines no one had erased yet. At the University of Göttingen, his lectures turned into debates. Professors explained why the theory was impossible, and he calmly showed calculations that didn't quite add up, but stubbornly promised to work if the angle, pressure, or temperature were just slightly adjusted. He was wrong, but he didn't give up. He didn't aim to prove he was right. He aimed to hear the sound of the future. To him, the idea of a jet engine wasn't an engineering challenge. It was poetry in motion. He imagined an aircraft not pushing through air, but tearing forward on a pure stream of fire. He dreamed of flight without the clatter of propellers, where the silence of the sky would be an ally, not an enemy. But dreamers don't get paid. After university, he had no lab, no investor. His papers gathered dust on the desk. He tried to sell the idea, and every time got the same answer. It's fantasy. It's beautiful, but impractical. Air can't withstand such temperatures. The turbine won't survive a minute. Hans didn't argue. He simply wrote down, "If the metal can't withstand it, find another metal. If the turbine melts, then cool it. If pressure breaks the flow, then widen the cross-section." To him, obstacles weren't walls. They were notes in the margins. He walked through workshops, looking for people who would help him build a prototype. Sometimes they listened. More often, they laughed. One mechanic said, "If air could be burned, we'd already be flying on fire." Hans replied calmly, "Maybe no one's tried yet." He lived modestly, almost poorly. At night, when the city slept, he returned to his drawings. Under the light of a desk lamp paper stained with fingers and dreams, he wrote equations, drew spirals, calculated pressure, everything he could. And every night he heard the same sound in his head. Not the drone of a propeller, but the whistle of a jet stream rushing forward. That sound didn't exist, but it was so vivid that Hans believed it just hadn't been made yet. He had no ambition to conquer the world. He didn't seek fame. He sought purity of the idea, to prove that nature could work without wheels, without blades, without the old crutches of engineering. He wanted movement to be not mechanical, but natural like breath, like wind, like flame. When he made his notes, he was 27. The world around him was preparing for war. Newspapers screamed about rearmament, about the might of the Reich, about the coming triumph of German science. And he wrote in the margins of his notebook, "If an engine can draw in air, compress it, ignite it, and exhale, then the sky will open." He didn't realize he was writing the script of the future. He simply followed a feeling that somewhere ahead, beyond known formulas, air was waiting to be released. And though people saw him as a weirdo, his eyes betrayed what mockery and fatigue couldn't hide. They burned with the very fire that would one day become the heart of the jet engine. He didn't know what to call what he was creating. He simply said, "It's not an engine, it's the breath of the future." But for it to become reality, he needed to meet someone willing to believe in the impossible with him. Someone who would give his idea metal, fuel, and sky. And that person already existed. His name was Ernst Haenkel. And very soon, the dreamer and the industrialist would collide. And from their meeting, a sound would be born that would change humanity. He didn't come with blueprints, he came with a dream. And that's precisely why no one took him seriously. When Hans von Ohain first began speaking about his jet principle, engineers listened with the kind of expression usually reserved for poets. Polite, but without hope. "You want an airplane to fly on a stream of hot gas?" they said. "That gas will melt everything to hell. The turbine won't hold, the fuel will explode, the air won't cooperate." The words, too complex, too expensive, too early, became his background noise. Hans got used to them, like the hum of the propeller he once dreamed of eliminating. He went from university to university, showing formulas, calculations, even rough sketches of the design, and every time he was met with the same thing, a smile. That condescending smile people give when they mean, "Dream on, kid, but don't get in the way of grown-ups working." He tried to find support in scientific institutes unsuccessfully. There, discipline reigned, and any deviation from the approved program was seen as near treason against science. No respected professor wanted to be associated with an idea that might end in an explosion. Von Ohain was left alone. No lab, no funding, no team. Just him and his drawings, stacks of papers filled with equations and compressed notes like, "Try reducing compressor blade size." Pressure holds, but turbine melts. Solution may lie in cooling the jet stream. He became a wanderer among engineers, not so much a scientist as a drifter of ideas. At one point, he started working in an auto repair shop just to earn a little money. By day, he fixed carburetors, and by night, he dreamed of fire that would push airplanes into the sky. One day, amid the noise and smell of gasoline, an acquaintance approached him, a mechanic to whom he had once shown his notes. "Listen," the man said, "you need to talk to Heinkel." Ernst Heinkel, a name spoken in Germany with both respect and caution. He was an aircraft designer, an industrialist, a fanatic of speed. His factories built airplanes. His name appeared in the Ministry of Aviation's plans. But most importantly, he hated the word impossible. Heinkel was a man who believed not in rules, but in results. He could yell at an engineer, toss a blueprint out the window, fire an entire team, but if he saw a spark of an idea, he'd bite down on it. He loved risk, because only risk birthed breakthroughs. When Hans first found himself in Heinkel's office, he felt as if he were standing trial before the sky itself. On the walls, airplane models, blueprints, awards. Behind the desk a man whose name was known throughout German aviation. "So," Heinkel said, gripping the folder of his notes, "you want me to believe that air can be made to burn?" Hans nodded silently. Heinkel smirked. "No one's ever done that before. You know what that means." "That I have to be the first," von Ohain replied. Heinkel was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I like your audacity. I'll give you a workshop, small, no team, no budget, just machines and metal. If nothing works in 6 months, I shut it all down." It wasn't a contract. It was a sentence with a delay. But for Hans, it meant one thing, a chance, his first ever. So the dreamer got a workshop small, dark, with a concrete floor and the smell of oil. Instead of a lab broken machines, instead of a team, a couple of workers who hadn't been told what they were even working on. From that moment on, every day became a battle. Metal melted, parts broke, compressors exploded. Hans often came home covered in soot, with burns on his hands, but with the same fire in his eyes as always. Heinkel rarely visited. Sometimes he just stood in the doorway, silently watching the young physicist tinkering with pieces of metal that, by all laws, shouldn't work together. He didn't understand how it was possible, but he saw that the boy believed. And belief, like flame, is contagious. And in that grimy workshop, amid the roar of machines and the smell of burnt kerosene, something began that would soon make the whole world look up to the sky. For now, it was just a whisper of madness, soon to become the roar of an engine. Sometimes it felt like the air itself resisted, as if the sky didn't want to be tamed. Each new day brought new failures, burnt alloys, melted nozzles, valves burst from pressure. The engine lived for exactly 3 seconds before choking, like a beast unaccustomed to its own heart. The workers in the shop exchanged glances. "This guy's gonna drive us crazy. How long can you keep burning metal?" And Hans replied simply, "Until it flies." Sometimes he stood at the table, holding a charred piece of turbine, whispering to himself, "You didn't break. You just showed me you're not ready yet." Those words became his mantra. He didn't see failures, he saw clues. Every explosion was a lesson, every crack a direction to dig deeper. Heinkel, though a stern man, began visiting the workshop more often. Not to scold, but to listen. He later said that for the first time in his life, he heard the sound of the future not in flight, not in the engine, but in the way persistence burns. "You know, Hans," he once said, watching yet another failed launch, "you remind me of a pilot who doesn't know how to fly, but takes off anyway." Von Ohain smiled. "My wings," he said, "are still inside the engine." Time passed. Over Europe, the clouds of war had already gathered. News spoke of invasions, new bombers, aerial duels. And somewhere deep in the industrial city of Rostock, 2 men were creating not a weapon, but an idea, a machine that didn't need propellers to defy gravity. They worked through the nights. Fire burned in the injectors. Air whistled through the pipes. Metal hummed. And at some point on one of those starless nights when the world sleeps and fate takes notes, the engine didn't explode. It rumbled, low, steady, with that deep sound that no longer resembled the cough of old motors. It sang like flame that had finally found its voice. Heinkel and von Ohain stood side by side, soot on their faces, eyes gleaming. No one said a word, they just listened. That sound wasn't just a roar, it was the beginning of a new era, still tiny, still imperfect, still unknown to the sky. But within that hum, the future was already singing. The morning of August 27th, 1939, began with silence. The kind of silence that comes before a storm, before a launch, before history decides to take a breath. On the airfield in Rostock stood the Heinkel He-178, unassuming, tiny, clad in silvery metal, a plane that looked like a dream that had forgotten it wasn't supposed to be real. Its nose cone gleamed in the first rays of sunlight. Compared to the giants of propeller-driven machines nearby, it looked like a toy. But inside, in its belly, a monster breathed the He-S-3B jet engine, the very heart Hans von Ohain had dreamed of for long, agonizing years. 2 men stood by the aircraft Heinkel and von Ohain. One a businessman, with eyes trained to see the impossible as an investment. The other a physicist, a weary dreamer who was finally holding reality in his hands. They didn't speak. Everything that could be said had already been said, then crossed out, recalculated, resoldered, and reassembled from sparks. The pilot, Erich Varsitz, climbed into the cockpit. He joked, but his laughter was tense. "If the engine explodes, consider me the first man to fly on fire," he said, fastening his helmet. Von Ohain stood still. His fingers trembled. He knew every nut, every valve, every millimeter of the path the stream of fire was about to take. Heinkel gave the signal. The crew stepped back. The technician powered up. First silence. Then a faint hiss, like someone striking a match in a cave. Then crackling, a hum, a roar. The ground trembled. Metal vibrated. The air above the nozzle shimmered. And the HES-3B spoke in its own language, the language of flame. It didn't roar like a motor. It howled like a beast long caged, now breathing freedom for the first time. Flames burst outward. Sparks flew. Dust rose in a cloud. Heinkel leaned toward Hans and, shouting over the roar, cried out, "He's alive!" Von Ohain didn't answer. He just watched. Because for the first time in his life, his dream had stopped being theory. It had become a body, moving in rhythm with the heart of the earth itself. The pilot applied thrust. The wheels screeched across the concrete. The plane rolled forward. Everyone held their breath. No one believed it would lift off. But in a moment, when the engine gave its steady, deep sound, not a scream, not a jolt, but a song, the machine began to accelerate. It sped up like a shadow of light. And then, the wheels left the ground. The world changed. The Heinkel, her 178, was flying. No propeller, no spinning blades, no familiar drone. Just a smooth, steady howl like the breath of the future. Von Ohain stood with his hands pressed to his chest, unable to believe his eyes. He didn't see a plane. He saw a flame that had learned to fly. Heinkel smiled, a rare, weary smile of a man who realized he was witnessing the birth of a new era. The plane circled the airfield light, confident, almost ceremonial. Below, workers shouted, waved their caps, some cried. When the He-178 touched down, it wasn't just a landing. It was the return of a legend from the future. The plane came to a halt, the engine quieted, and a strange hum hung in the air, as if space itself hadn't yet grasped what had happened. People stood silent. Even the wind paused. Heinkel was the first to break the silence. He walked toward the plane slowly, as if approaching a living being, and touched its skin. The metal was hot, pulsing as if it truly breathed. He looked at Hans, and in his gaze there was no business calculation, no cold engineering interest, only pure, childlike wonder. "That was flight," he said softly. "Real flight." Hans nodded, unable to speak. His eyes shone with soot, exhaustion, and something more, the realization that he had touched the sky itself. Pilot Warsitz climbed out of the cockpit, staggering. His face was drenched in sweat, his lips stretched in a wide, almost mad smile. "She flies," he said. "No propeller, no noise." It felt like lightning pushed me. He was the first person in history to fly on pure fire. Engineers and workers crowded around. Some inspected the nozzles. Others touched the skin, as if not believing this wasn't fantasy. Some cried. Some just stood, speechless. It was a moment when everyone from mechanic to designer felt like a co-author of a miracle. But shadows were already gathering in the distance. Newspapers blared headlines about Poland. Troops moved toward borders, and in the Luftwaffe headquarters, no one rushed to celebrate. The military didn't want a breakthrough. They wanted a weapon, not flight, but a bomber. When Heinkel presented the He-178 to the ministry, the reaction was cold. Officers listened without lifting their eyes from the papers. Too experimental, too expensive, too risky. They didn't realize they weren't seeing a prototype. They were witnessing the dawn of a new age. Von Ohain knew this. He watched as his creation was rejected by those who should have seen its future, and felt a strange calm. He knew Someday they would understand. When the war ended, when the world grew tired of destruction, then his engine would lift other machines, not for war, for flight. For now, the 178 stood in a hangar, like a forgotten secret. Its skin still gleamed with soot, the air still smelled of kerosene, and on the wall hung a note left by one of the workers. She flew, after all. And that mattered more than any orders, stamps, or reports. Because on that day, August 27, 1939, humanity tore from the earth its final secret. It learned to fly without wings, without blades-on pure idea. The news of the He-178's flight didn't thunder. It was smothered in the rustle of orders and the clatter of boots. August 27, 1939, became a secret. Not a celebration of humanity, but a note in the archives, hidden under the label Geheim, classified. Days later, Germany invaded Poland. The world ignited like a powder trail. The roar of engines meant to symbolize progress was drowned in the din of war, bombs, and the cries of cities. The sky, to which von Ohain had given new breath, now breathed fire of war. The He-178 was hidden in a hangar. It never flew again. It stood there as a reminder of a miracle that came at the wrong time. Metal that had been wings of the future became a museum piece before it could be displayed. The Ministry of Aviation showed no enthusiasm. Bureaucrats saw not poetry in the invention, but inconvenience. Difficult to produce, no serial potential, too unstable. They wanted planes that could be stamped out by the hundreds, not dreams that burned too brightly. Heinkel fumed. He pounded his fists on the table, insisting this was the future, that the jet engine could change everything. But the military didn't care. They wanted now, not tomorrow. And tomorrow was what von Ohain lived for. He didn't argue. He simply kept working now on new engine models, quietly, without fanfare, without press. He became a shadow of his own revolution, a man who had shifted the boundaries of the possible, and whom almost no one knew. When war broke out, the world never heard the name Hans von Ohain. Newspapers wrote about fronts, generals, victories. No one spoke of the physicist who made air burn. And somewhere in the back of a factory, among rusty parts and charred blueprints, he kept a small metal plate, a piece of that very He-S-3B engine. Sometimes he would take it out, look at the veins in the metal, and smile. To others, it was just a scrap. To him, it was proof that dreams can roar, blaze, and lift steel birds into the sky. The world learned about the He-178 only after the war. When the bombing ceased, when Europe gasped in ashes, documents were found in the archives, blueprints, photos, reports. Scientists in the West were stunned. Americans and Brits were still designing their jet engines, but Germany had already flown just once, quietly, but flown. By then, von Ohain no longer sought fame. He knew his name might be forgotten, but his idea would live on in every jet aircraft, every roaring airliner, every flight where air burns beneath the wing. And that was enough. When he was once asked what he felt, seeing his invention change the world, he answered simply, "I felt the same as I did then, when I first heard flame breathe. Only now I know it will never be silent again." Thus the story of a humble physicist became an echo that still resounds in the sky. Every time a turbine roars, somewhere deep in that sound lives the memory of that morning. The story of Hans von Ohain is not just the story of an engineer who built an engine. It is the story of a man who dared to listen to the silence of the sky and answer it with flame. He didn't seek power, didn't chase awards, didn't dream of becoming an arms maker. His dream was almost laughably pure: to see a human fly, not because they spin blades, but because they've understood the very essence of motion. He realized that air is not an obstacle, but an ally. That the sky is not an enemy, but an extension of our thirst to go further, higher, faster. He wasn't a soldier. He didn't fight in battles, didn't earn ranks, didn't command regiments. His battlefield lay between blueprints and formulas, where ideas were weapons and doubt was the enemy. And it was there, on that silent field, that he won his victory. The world didn't hear his name for a long time. There was too much noise, too much thunder, too much destruction. But all great things begin not with fanfare, but with a whisper. The whisper of one person who said, "What if?" Those 3 words are the most dangerous in human history. They've toppled empires, sparked revolutions, uncovered laws, composed music, and sent ships beyond the horizon. Von Ohain spoke them in a world where everyone said, "Impossible." And he proved that impossible is just something not yet built. When his engine first roared, humanity didn't just take a step forward. It broke free from an old philosophy one where everything was measured by the speed of a spinning propeller. He showed that motion could be born from fire, from compressed air, from the energy of the universe itself. He didn't just change airplanes. He changed our relationship with the sky. Now, when we board a plane and hear that deep, confident roar of the turbine, we rarely think about the voice inside it. The voice of the one who first made flame carry us forward instead of destroy. Every takeoff is a quiet thank you to Hans von Ohain. Thank you for the courage to dream when the world demanded obedience. Thank you for choosing not weapons, but an idea. He didn't build planes for war. He built a bridge between earth and sky. And though his name may be lost in the notebooks of history, his trace remains where nothing can be erased, in the air. Because the sky remembers those who first broke its silence. And every jet-powered flight is like a repetition of the prayer he spoke when he started the engine. Let the flame live. Let man fly. The moral of his story is simple and beautiful in its resolve. Every new sky begins with solitude, with stubbornness, with the madness of one dreamer who isn't afraid to look foolish, isn't afraid to fail, isn't afraid of silence. Von Ohain didn't fight anyone. He fought the impossible and won. He proved that you don't need to destroy to spark a revolution. Sometimes it's enough to build an engine that breathes like a dream loudly, steadily, endlessly. And if he were standing today beneath the roar of modern airliners, he would probably smile and say, "See? I just wanted man to fly faster than the wind." And in that smile lies the essence of progress. Because every breakthrough begins not with war, not with orders, but with someone who once dared to look into the sky and disturb its eternal silence. Hans von Ohain didn't become a newspaper hero, didn't enter school textbooks as a symbol, but he became the one without whom the world might have remained grounded. He wasn't a warrior, but he won. He wasn't a pilot, but he gave wings to billions. And when the turbine flame sings again in the sky, within that sound lives his quiet, stubborn forward.